Welcome to Dashing Dish. Today we're loving like my Aunt Lorrie by sharing the love of hospitality. Today's menu includes barbecue beef with roasted vegetables, cheesy potatoes, clean eating sugar cookies, and a coffee cake that is sure to please. Remembering my Aunt Lorrie and cooking up her favorite recipes coming up next. My Aunt Lorrie is my mom's older sister, and because she and my mom were so close growing up, she was always like a second mom to me. My Aunt Lorrie lived a full life until she went home at the age of 74 after fighting a tough battle with cancer. Shortly after she died, the Lord gave me a dream of my aunt in a field of lilies as she ran towards Jesus. She was filled with so much joy that she was laughing as she ran into his arms. And just a few days later, my Aunt Lorrie passed on to her heavenly home. After she passed, I thought about the dream that God gave me and how it brought me such peace. I know that the hope of heaven is so very real, and because of that, I look forward to seeing my Aunt Lorrie again one day soon. Today we're making recipes that remind me of my Aunt Lorrie, and shortly after she passed, I had the privilege of looking through her recipe box and putting healthier spins on some of her richest dishes. So today we're going to start with a barbecue beef with all kinds of roasted vegetables that are slow cooked in the crock pot. And so I started with a beef brisket. Now to this, I'm going to add some seasoning, and you want to season your meat first whenever you're doing a crock pot dish because that's really what needs the most seasoning is the meat. So I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of onion powder, ½ teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of paprika, and 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. Next, I'm going to add my veggies. Now, whenever you're thinking about veggies that you're going to add to a crock pot, you want to think about using firmer veggies, especially when it's down on the bottom because those will get cooked the most. And if there's ever any vegetables that you don't want to get overcooked, then just add those towards the end of the cooking process. So I have a pack of baby carrots. You could use regular carrots, about 2 or 3 large carrots will work. 2 onions that I just roughly diced. Then I have about a ½ pound of potatoes, and then 1 pack of sliced mushrooms. So all your veggies go on top, and I ended with the softest vegetable, which is the mushrooms. And then I'm also going to cut up some celery, and the original dish actually didn't have celery, but I thought that this would be a delicious spin. And it was really fun going through my Aunt Lorrie's recipes because I got a chance to kind of relive and think through all the things that I remember her making for our family and enjoying. And so it just brought me back to all the dishes that she made. And usually she liked to make things that were sweet, so she liked to bake a lot. But when she did cook a rich dish, it was always very homey, so it was like the comfort food. So this meat and potatoes, this is what I think of when I think of my Aunt Lorrie. So that looks like enough celery, and I'm just gonna sprinkle this on top. It was also fun to go through the recipes and think about ways that I could put healthy spins on the original. Then I'm just gonna add some barbecue sauce. Now I like to use organic, but you can do low sugar, any kind of barbecue sauce you like. You can even make your own barbecue sauce. I have plenty of recipes for a little bit lower versions of barbecue sauce. And then 2 cups of chicken stock or beef stock, whatever you have on hand. And this will just help the meat cook through, and it will be nice and tender because we're gonna cook it for 4 hours. So cooking in the crock pot is great for really large cuts of meat because it helps break them down and it just falls apart in your mouth, and it's so tender, and the vegetables are the perfect side. And you could also make this in your oven. If you want to put it into a large casserole dish, you can just put it in your oven, cover it with foil for about 3 to 3.5 hours at 350 degrees, and it will cook perfectly. Next up, we're going to make my Aunt Lorrie's sugar cookies. My Aunt Lorrie lived a full life until she went home at the age of 74 after fighting a tough battle with cancer. Shortly after her funeral, I began to ponder how I could carry on her legacy, and I began to ask myself, how can I love like my Aunt Lorrie? As I thought about the ways that she loved on people, I thought specifically about her gift of hospitality. She was incredibly talented in the kitchen, and she was well known for her beautiful sugar cookies. She made them for gifts, baby showers, weddings, and just about every cause for celebration. We always told her that her sugar cookies were so beautiful that she could sell them, but she never wanted to. She always knew that they were a gift that could demonstrate God's love. To honor her memory, I decided to start baking for others who could use a reminder of God's love as well. And with every batch of cookies that I made, I smiled as I pictured how she loved on others through food. My Aunt Lorrie lived her life to share Jesus, whether it be through a home-cooked meal, beautifully decorated cookies, or something that she crafted. She was always looking to share Christ with every gift that she could give. I believe that the moment she went on to heaven, God embraced her and said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." Although we're sad that she's no longer here with us, we rejoice knowing that her life with Jesus has truly begun. My Aunt Lorrie was absolutely famous for her sugar cookies, and I'm going to put a clean eating spin on these sugar cookies today without any butter or flour, and I'm going to show you how I made the dough. To start preparing the dough, I combined my dry ingredients in a large mixing bowl. 2 cups of almond flour, 1/4 cup of sweetener, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. I stirred the dry ingredients together until they were combined. I then added 2 tablespoons of applesauce and 2 tablespoons of maple syrup to the bowl and stirred until the mixture formed a dough. I then placed the dough between 2 sheets of parchment paper and rolled it out until it was about 1/8 inch thick. So the dough is all ready and rolled out, and now all that's left to do is cut them into cute little cookie shapes. And this little teapot just reminds me of my Aunt Lorrie. And what I love about these cookies is that it really does bring me back to my Aunt Lorrie. In fact, one of the first things I think about when I see a sugar cookie is her, because she made them for every celebration, whether it was baby showers, weddings, parties, or just as a gift to give to someone who kind of just was feeling low or needed the love of God. She would make cookies and decorate them so beautifully. Now, these are a little bit of a healthier spin, but we can always decorate them even without frosting. I like to just kind of sprinkle some sprinkles on before baking, and that way it adds just a little bit of color and sweetness without all of the excess sugar. So I'm gonna finish cutting these out and then pop them into the oven for 350 degrees, about 10 minutes, and they'll be all set and ready to enjoy. One of the most common problems with making sugar cookies is over-baking the cookies. Most people think that cookies should be baked until they're golden brown. However, this isn't the case with sugar cookies. I recommend pulling them from the oven as soon as they've set and just start to gain color. This will make for the perfect and still tender sugar cookies every time. Coming up next, my mom will be joining me in the kitchen as I put my own twist on a classic.
The recipes from today's program are available.
Well, my mom is here with me in the kitchen today to remember my Aunt Lorrie, and just as much as she loved to cook, she loved to bake. In fact, I think she loved baking even more.
She did.
She loved sweets, didn't she?
Oh, she loved sweet. Obsessed would be the word.
She would always say, "I'm addicted to sugar. I just can't stop." In fact, whenever she'd come to our houses, she would go rummaging through the pantry for something sweet. So that was what she was known for, is her baked goods. And we're gonna make a recipe, Mom, that actually won a competition that she entered into, and it is her apple pecan coffee cake. And we're gonna make it in a bundt pan, which I didn't even have a bundt pan before I recreated this recipe in a healthy way, but it turned out absolutely beautiful, so she did it right. We're just gonna put a few healthy spins on it. So Mom, I'm gonna have you kind of dice up this apple. You can peel it if you want to ahead of time, but I actually didn't mind the apple skin being in there. It actually gave it a little bit of texture. So she did peel her apples in the recipe. I just left the skin on, so whatever you like. And you can just do little bite-sized chunks. To do the batter for this, I have 2 cups of oat flour here. And then I'm gonna add 1.5 cup of sweetener. And she did use 1.5 cup of white sugar. So instead I used a monk fruit sweetener to make it a little bit lighter. Then we have a 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder and a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of cinnamon, and this was all exactly as her recipe called for. 1 cup of applesauce, and in her recipe, she called for 1 cup of oil. So we're replacing 1 cup of oil. She used canola oil. So this is definitely gonna be lighter, and you can't even tell that it's applesauce versus oil. Have you ever baked with applesauce?
Your recipes, and I can't tell the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes people think, oh no, it won't be the same unless I use the butter and the oil and the sugar. But really, there's so many great ways to make alternatives, and you really can't tell in the recipe. Then we have 1/3 cup of maple syrup, and you can use organic maple syrup. You could even use agave or honey for this recipe. And then we just have 4 eggs, and those apples are looking good, Mom. You might want to chop them just a little more
finer?
bite-sized.
Okay.
Just some of the bigger pieces, just
All right.
so that when you bite into the coffee cake, you're not getting a massive chunk of apple.
Okay.
So, Mom, do you have any great memories of Aunt Lorrie?
I have so many great memories. You know, one of the memories that I have is just her gift giving. Whether it was making homemade soup for someone and she'd put them in a mason jar, and sometimes it would be a little surprise. She'd leave them on someone's porch. But most often she'd like to come with a gift and spend time with you, because that was really her love language, was time spent. And I love spending time with her. It was always laughter and telling stories, but she just had the gift of not only gift giving, loving people well, but just she loved spending time with people. I think that's your gift too, time spent.
Well, I would say that even more so, that's you. I mean, when I think about you guys, my mom is my Aunt Lorrie's younger sister, and I just could see how they were truly best friends, because when they were together, I mean, they were just 2 peas in a pod. So every time I think of Aunt Lorrie, I also think of you.
Aww.
And I think that was just the way that her heart loved people and the way that she loved Jesus, and you portray the same thing. So I believe you really are carrying on a huge part of that legacy, Mom.
Thanks, Kate.
And you just want 3 cups of apples. So, Mom, those are looking great. It looks like we have enough there that we can add to this batter now. So once you start mixing the batter, you can kind of add the apples towards the end, just like with chocolate chips in a recipe where you kind of just stir them in. So, Mom, I'll have you add some of these to the bowl, and we can do it together. And if you don't have a bundt pan at home, you're like me, then you can just use a regular cake pan or even a springform pan and just put a mason jar or an oven-safe cup in the middle, because what a bundt pan essentially does is that if you ever have a cake that tends to fall in the middle, it just prevents the falling, the sinking in the middle. So you just need something kind of sturdy and oven-safe in the middle, and it'll turn out great. So, Mom, I'm just gonna fold in these apples, and then I'm gonna pop it into the oven at 325 degrees for about 50 minutes, or until a toothpick comes out clean. So it does bake for quite a while, and your house will smell like fall when you put this into the oven. And it just made me smile when I put it into the oven, because I just thought of my Aunt Lorrie and how proud she would have been baking this cake. And when we come back, we're gonna make one of her famous holiday dishes, cheesy scalloped potatoes. When Jesus died on the cross, he demonstrated the greatest act of love the world has ever known by laying down his life. If we're ever gonna be true followers of Christ, he only requires one thing of us, and that is to love. I believe that Jesus gave us this one new commandment because it is the single most effective way to show God's life-changing power. Oftentimes we can get caught up thinking that we don't have anything to offer, but the truth is, everything that we do and say has the ability to demonstrate God's love. When we live our lives to love on others, we shine bright in a dark world that's longing to see the light and love of Christ. All right, well, we're gonna make one of my Aunt Lorrie's famous holiday dishes. Every single time it was the holidays, she would always bring her famous cheesy scalloped potatoes. Mom, Do you agree? Do you remember that?
Absolutely.
I mean, every single time. And they no doubt were just like the worst things for you. I mean, they were just dripping with grease and butter. But hey, that was the way that my Aunt Lorrie loved, was with butter, I'm convinced. So instead of using butter or any really high fat ingredients, we just did about 1 tablespoon of oil, and then I just cooked off 1 tablespoon of garlic and 1 diced onion in the bottom of a pan. Then I added 1/4 cup of oat flour. So instead of white flour, oat flour to coat the onions, and that will help form a really creamy, rich sauce. So I'm just gonna kind of finish up my sauce, and Mom, I'll have you slice the potatoes using a mandolin slicer.
Awesome.
So if this gets full, then you can go ahead and just start to kind of dump it into our 9x13 pan there.
Perfect.
And yeah, and that's like the most nifty creation. But if you don't have a mandolin slicer, you can just slice really thin cuts on a potato. And you can use any kind of potatoes you like. I like to use golden sweet potatoes because they have more nutrition than white potatoes, but you can use whatever you have on hand. Mom, what was your favorite holiday memory with Aunt Lorrie?
Well, definitely Thanksgiving, because, and I think you may have shared this, that it was one of your favorite memories too. We would go around the table after dinner sharing, you know, a question, you know, and I remember last Thanksgiving, before Aunt Lorrie passed, we talked about, you know, what was so meaningful to her.
Yeah.
And family was everything. And of course, you know, just her sharing with us brought us all to tears. It was really a beautiful moment that I cherish, and I think it was your sister Emily who caught it all on film.
Yeah, it's so precious to have those memories now on video. Although we know we'll see her again one day in heaven, it's so nice while we're here to relive those memories. And, you know, even with food, it's like when we make food that she made, it brings us back the smells, the taste, everything about it. It reminds me of Aunt Lorrie.
That's right.
So that looks really good. You're doing a beautiful
Thank
job
you.
layering. You can continue doing that, and I'm gonna finish up the sauce. I just did 3 cups of almond milk into the pan, and I'm gonna bring it to a simmer. So you wanna get it nice and hot, and it will start to thicken. And then I did a little bit of salt and pepper. You don't have to necessarily measure it. You could do about a 1/2 teaspoon if you want to, and just pepper to taste. And then we're gonna wait till this thickens up a little bit, and I'm gonna add 3 cups of cheese. So yes, 3 cups of cheese, but we saved a lot using the almond milk, not using any butter, just a little bit of oil. So this is a lightened up version of the dish. So Mom, my favorite memory, I have to share it with you, of Aunt Lorrie, is definitely being in the kitchen with her. Because every single holiday, every single time I would get into the kitchen with her, she would teach me how to use a cookie cutter, or she would teach me how to deglaze a pan, or something, use a knife properly. And so I think that that's where her love for even teaching, even in the kitchen, came from, is that she just loved to be with kids. So she would think about, how can I teach these children something? So it didn't matter how old you were, in her eyes, you were a child.
She loves spending time with you, and of course, when you were little, one of my favorite memories, of course, is you and Aunt Lorrie making cookies, and I have a photograph of you with chocolate all over your face, a big wooden spoon in your hand. I think that's where you began your talent, cooking with Aunt Lorrie.
I like to think that that might be a little bit of something that I took on from Aunt Lorrie, is the love for baking and cooking. In fact, shortly after she passed away, one of the things I thought about was, you know, what can I bake that would remind me of my Aunt Lorrie? And so every time I think about her, I think of her sugar cookies. So now every time I make cookies, I just think about my Aunt Lorrie. So this sauce is looking good. It's bubbling away. It's getting a little bit thicker, and that oat flour is what makes the sauce thickened. And so now we're just gonna add our cheese. And Mom, those potatoes look beautiful. And I love how you're layering those, because that is really the key to cheesy potatoes. You have to layer them so that in each bite you get a delicious thin cut with the cheese in between. Okay, so you can see, Mom, how rich and thick this sauce is.
That looks beautiful.
So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna have you finish layering out those potatoes.
Okay.
And I used 3 pounds of potatoes. So you just want enough to fill up your pan. So a nice 9x13 pan. And I'm gonna start to ladle in this cheese sauce. And essentially you could do layers of cheese between all the potatoes if you really wanted cheese to kind of flow throughout the dish. But when you bake it, it really does get all between all the nooks and crannies of the potatoes anyway.
Oh, that looks so good already, and it's not even baked.
So now I'm just gonna cover this with foil, and I'm gonna bake it for 1 hour covered, and then I'm gonna remove the foil. And if you want a really delicious cheesy topping, you can sprinkle some more cheese on at that point, and then bake it uncovered for 30 more minutes at 350 degrees. So Mom, I think we should enjoy some sugar cookies and relive a few more memories with Aunt
I
Lorrie.
love that idea.
Okay. Coming up next, my mom and I will remember my Aunt Lorrie as we sit down to a meal of her favorites: barbecue beef, cheesy potatoes, and yummy sugar cookies. Sharing our faith in Jesus can be intimidating. Boldness can feel like risky business, but only if we do it on our own. When the Lord leads the way, we can follow Him without fear, knowing that He is the one at work through us. And ultimately, the outcome is in His hands. Well, Mom, it was so fun to be in the kitchen and remember Aunt Lorrie today with you. We have her apple pecan cake, her barbecue beef, cheesy scalloped potatoes, and clean eating sugar cookies.
I just have to say, Katie, Aunt Lorrie was proud of all her family, but because cooking and baking was her love, I know how proud she is of you.
Aw, thanks, Mom. Well, speaking of baking, we have to try one of her famous sugar cookies.
I can't wait.
So go ahead and help yourself.
They look delicious.
To find these recipes and more just like them, head over to dashingdish.com, where you'll find recipes and more to nourish your body and soul.